because it's technically 8 o'clock my time, but thank you for coming to the early bird session here. Thank you, Dr. Cotter, for the introduction. And again, my name is Teddy Gillen with Southern Protective Group, and we're a boutique insurance firm out of Woodstock, Georgia, which is a bedroom community of Atlanta. My president, Greg, is here with me down here. He hates when I use the word boutique because in our space, in the malpractice space, we're very, very large, and that's our expertise. Is we are risk management and insurance brokers in the malpractice space for physicians and physician practices and hospitals. And a part of our conversations with our clients, inclusive of their liability and exposures, cyber liability and data breach is a topic that comes up often. And if you're like most of us, you see headlines in the newspaper and on CNN and whether it's China, Russia. If you're listening to Fox News, you might hear that it's a world conspiracy to steal all of our data. But in reality, as we'll find that most of the data breaches that come right from internally into your office, whether it's from a rogue employee or just an accidental information displacement. But I want to thank you guys for having me. My background, real briefly, is I went to the University of Georgia. Thought I'd plug that. Risk management and insurance major, and I've been in the industry for about 12 years. So to get us started, sort of the need statement is the healthcare industry is one of the hardest hit industries, with criminal cyber attacks up 125% since 2010. 91% of all healthcare organizations had at least one data breach in the last 2 years. One of the primary drivers for this increased attack on the healthcare industry is the high value of medical identity, upwards of 10 or 20 times the value of credit card number on the black market, where identity thieves buy them to submit fraudulent claims for high-value medical devices, drugs, and procedures. So the healthcare industry is a targeted industry. I mean, it is the number one industry for sensitive information. Just as a quick disclaimer, a lot of these statistics, I'll be referencing the Ponemon Institute, which is an independent, they provide independent research on privacy, data protection, and information security. And then the Identity Theft Resource Center, which is a nonprofit referred to as the ITRC, and they're nationally recognized and come up with these statistics on the cyber claims. So really the goal of our presentation today is more informational, just to bring this to top of mind awareness and have you thinking about how to reduce your exposure and consider possibly transferring that exposure somewhere or doing something about it. Let's see the next slide. I'll throw some statistics at you. 2013 and 14 documented 1,400 data breaches in the U.S. And as you can see from this list, from St. Joe Health System, 405,000 records stolen, all the way down to the office of Dr. Dennis Flynn in Illinois with 13,646 records stolen. So the lesson here is that no one is really immune to a data breach or records being stolen, whether you're the large University of Indiana or you're the office of Dr. Flynn. It's a potential problem. And the cost of these things, back in 2009, this data drags a little bit, but in 2009, the cost per record runs about $200 to $300 in total cost to an organization. So as you can see, you get 405,000 records stolen. at $300 a record, your cost is going to climb significantly and quickly. These costs include detection, escalation, notification, response with legal, administrative expenses, customer defections, opportunity loss, reputation management. There's all types of losses that can happen, financial losses. Some other breaches that you may have seen in the headlines: $50 million class action lawsuit against Long Island Health System, a $400,000 penalty in a HIPAA case, and another one where 3 laptops were stolen from a podiatry office.
Teddy, you might mention that, and I found this even with my Mag Mutual policy, that I wasn't covered very well for this kind of breach, along with a bunch of other things.
Yes.
The policy I have is several years old, and it was an add-on. If I wanted it, I had to go buy it separately, and not just your product, but others now may or may not include your coverage for that, and it's a serious deal.
Right. That's a great point. And
yeah.
One that I will get to in the presentation, but just like any risk that you might face in your business, you have the opportunity to absorb the risk. You have the opportunity to try to reduce that risk, and you have the opportunity to transfer. And transfer typically is onto a third party or a purchasing of insurance. And as Dr. Cotter mentioned, many times if you have an individual malpractice policy, there will be some coverage for these types of claims built into the policies themselves. But in reality, most people read these headlines and it's a little overwhelming. I mean, you have $50 million class action lawsuit, and the thought is, what do I do with my own practice? And as Greg and I are meeting with our clients, this is the typical plan that people have in place, is just something like this. And no one, throw your hands up in the air and say help. I mean, it's not something that a lot of people have prepared for and really put some thought into. So again, our presentation here is to kind of bring this to your awareness and talk about some solutions. So some of the talking points today and some of the things that we're going to cover is sort of the definition of a data breach. That's going to be fairly obvious, identifying sources of a breach and the impact on your organization, and then have a little deeper understanding of how to mitigate and transfer your exposure.
I'm curious to know how many have their own servers in your office. I do. We work through a server. We have workstations, but they go through a server. And how many of you have your own private software on that server? How many have a Hillary Clinton server? I used to, but ours just goes through there now. Right. It's not stored there. It goes to the cloud, wherever that is.
How many upload images on their website of patients?
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that you're...
We have lots of images, and we go to a lot of trouble. Like, for example, I was talking yesterday about the pictures that we take. We don't put any identifiers on the picture. We'll take a separate picture of their document and then the patient picture, so that if that picture got out, there's no identifier on the picture itself. Does that make sense? So there are all kinds of little things out there, but Teddy, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
yeah, not a problem. It's a great point, and just with the images uploading, I mean, you can put something online and accidentally put an identifier of some kind on it and still be sued under a HIPAA violation if you don't get the proper documentation from your patients in order to do that. And actually, there was a plastic surgeon in Illinois that was sued for that exact reason, and listing one of the things that corrective surgeries that he did was cocaine nose, and he put the picture of the before and after, and with the patient's information, and the patient took exception to that and sued under a HIPAA violation, and that was not a pretty case either. So it's not always something that it's a criminal cyber attack. It could just be,
It can be inadvertent.
Releasing private information inadvertently.
And a lot of those, what do they call that? The data that goes with the slide, pictures and things like that, that's in the background. Unless you're a real computer expert or geek or something, that data, metadata with those pictures is, unless you know how to handle that, you may be, like if I put something on a website and I don't know how to do it just right, that the metadata may go with it. So somebody just right-clicking, if they know what they're doing, they can find out who that is.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point. So a data breach, this is defined by the Ponemon Institute, which is pretty obvious in terms of stealing information, the personal health information, social security number, driver's license, medical record, debit card, credit card, personal sensitive information that can include images. It can be paper, it can be electronic. A breach, it could be stolen, it could be viewed. It's when someone unauthorized has access to the information and is able to view it, and the access to that information could potentially harm that individual. So pretty obvious stuff. So here's sources of a breach. Again, from the headlines, oftentimes you'll see with the Chinese or the Russian, they stole the data. In reality, not only is that true, but most breaches and loss of information occur from either accidental or rogue employees, so a lost laptop, with your content not properly encrypted. You got a rogue employee that wants to harm you. Using new technology and working through the bugs. A lot of times you use a third party, and that third party doesn't have the proper controls over your information. Improper disposal of patient records. And the point there at the bottom is just most breaches are just caused by simple negligence and can be avoided altogether. But given this list, I think if you're a physician practice, really taking a harder look about how you capture information and putting systems and processes in place on your technology, and what do you do in the event of termination of an employee? What do you do in the event of a lost laptop? And try to work through some of these scenarios internally and say, what's our protocol here? And I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all answer and a solution. But I do think that a brainstorm session on your organization and your particular office, you can come up with a pretty good list of protocols in the event of a laptop stolen or how you dispose of patient records and taking a hard look at some of the third parties you may use that have access to your information and understanding how they protect it, and then how they protect you from a liability standpoint. So that's these this list of sources is a good list to sort of sit down in a room and talk to your organization about how you can minimize and mitigate these risks. So a little bit about the impact of what happens after a breach. I mean, it's not like someone just opens up a vault and takes your money, and it's easily quantifiable, and you can say, hey, the $100,000 was stolen. I mean, there's a lot of it is, and that we lost a laptop and someone hacked our system and they have access to our information. And what does that mean? And so there's a forensic investigation that can be really lengthy, and it kind of starts at that process. Is we have to determine what happened and how much of the information was stolen, and if that becomes public, I mean you might have a public relations issue. Obviously, the plastic surgeon in Illinois, that hits headlines. He may not work again. I mean, it would be severely damaging to his business to have that out into the marketplace. But there's a part of the cost I mentioned, the per record stolen, is if it's a financial data stolen, you're required legally to provide credit monitoring for those that had their information stolen, and that cost can add up from an annual period of it could be anywhere from $20 to $50 an individual for credit monitoring annually, and long-term consequences with fines and penalties, HIPAA fines, RAC audits, reputational damage, income loss, and potential class action lawsuits. This is an image put out by the Ponemon Institute that just shows you visually just the top risks that patients face, and it's obviously the financial identity theft you would think would be number one, but the public exposure and embarrassment is actually the highest risk, and then the third thing there, the medical identity theft, is that's becoming a rising issue in this world of ours, is people stealing your information in order to get some sort of free health care, because they've not only stolen your medical information, but they're using it in some kind of way to their benefit. And so on the mitigate and transfer exposure, as I mentioned, I mean, I think if you come in with your organization, you brainstorm just where are our exposures, where do they lie, I don't think complete avoidance is possible. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you can't eliminate the risk because technology is always changing, and you can't, you have employees that are revolving, and the information is out there, and it just cannot be completely protected at all times. And so, in our business of insurance, as we talk our clients through, what the risk is and what the potential impact is of a loss, and what the cost to transfer that risk is to an insurance company, and does that cost, does it make sense for the risk and for your organization financially? And oftentimes, it can be when the cyber liability, data breach, and privacy security product first came out, it was extremely expensive. No one really knew how to price it. And it was oftentimes just in Lloyd's of London, some of these specialty type of insurance markets. And it was, quite frankly, completely unaffordable. I mean, it was, unless you're taking millions of dollars of retention and buying excess on top of that, and then that just kind of defeats the purpose. And so, but as Dr. Cotter mentioned, if you have an individual malpractice policy, it is good to sort of take a deeper look into that policy, because oftentimes they will include a minimal amount of coverage per physician for things like HIPAA, RAC audits, data breaches, and privacy and security. And as Dr. Cotter mentioned, we partner with the SMA, with the Medicus, and the Medicus policy has $100,000 of coverage per physician built into their policy. And that is above an industry standard, but oftentimes the other individual malpractice policies will include something, maybe it's $25,000 or $50,000, which gives you a little bit better comfort in knowing that if something were to happen, you can respond to a HIPAA violation or RAC audit or some sort of a claim with a little bit of coverage there. But I would advise you to talk to your insurance professional, whoever you work with, about providing additional options. I mean, out in the marketplace, you can get $1 million, you can get $2 million, you can go on up. The limits are as high as that you're willing to purchase, but they are out there, and the cost is continuing to go down. And so it's worth exploring, what your risk is, and then, do I have a significant exposure, and what can I do to mitigate that exposure, and then finally, is it cost affordable to transfer it? Or you could do what most people do, is you just take 2 aspirin and stick your head in the sand. And that's it, Dr. Cotter. I would like to open it up to any questions. I'd love to hear if anyone's had some individual any individual experience in their organization with privacy and security or any sort of loss.
In some institutions, we have to log into a program. It's an electronic record. How fast should we turn them off before we walk away to deal with the patient personally?
That's a good question. I don't think. Are you saying so? You have your computer open and the personal information open, and then you leave your station
To actually touch the patient.
Patient.
I've looked at the history, for example. Then I go and I've gotten the history. Now I'm going to examine the patient.
And are you in a patient room with
Yes.
where it's just you and the patient?
Yes.
I mean, and it's their data up.
Yes.
I mean, I think if you leave the room, you can lock out of the computer. And I think if you're there with the patient, you may not have a big exposure. But I don't think it ever hurts to log out any time you leave your computer. Just that would be on the safe side.
We use Citrix to get to our servers
Mhm.
in the office, so nothing is really kept on our laptops. We don't keep data on it.
Right.
It's all going to our servers through the Citrix environment.
Okay.
Wouldn't that cut down our liability? Some of we have to get the information from our servers.
Right. Well, it would depend on their contract with Citrix and how they corporately indemnify and hold harmless agreements that are wrapped up into that contract. So it'd be interesting just to look into it. If Citrix takes ownership, then it may very well reduce your exposure to that. But then you have the reputational damage is still a possibility. If someone accesses your information, that the Citrix isn't going to be on the front page of the newspaper. It'll probably be the organization that you're working for. So those are some things to think about. But I would absolutely look into the contract, and as much exposure as you can push off onto Citrix, I would. And a lot of times those things can be negotiable.
How much exposure would I have for information sent to my office from another medical group that was for the wrong patient? And they have a flyleaf that says always that this is not your patient, don't use this information, yada, yada. But it's common. There are a lot of human errors sending out information.
Right. Well, in that particular instance, I think it would be a good question for an attorney, is to say, hey, listen, this happened. I did get confidential information sent to me that didn't belong to me. What are my next steps here? And oftentimes, what's great about if you do have a policy that has a built-in coverage in place, like the Medicus NorCal, or if you're purchasing coverage elsewhere, they have resources. I mean, they want you to pick up the phone and call them and access their people. And usually it's a forensic accountant and a investigator or an attorney. So that would be my recommendation.
This is not an uncommon thing, this is a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely pick up the phone and make that call to an expert and say, what is my exposure here, and what should be my system and process for when this happens. This happens a lot, and I don't want to be exposed to a suit. What can I do to remove that exposure and then take those necessary steps?
I was going to ask about if you could make a comment about timing on these things, because I deal with some of these issues in terms of when questions come through and there's a potential breach. And sometimes as a risk management specialist, I've asked the policyholder, well, when did this incident occur? Oh, well, it happened like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And maybe this is the first time they're contacting us. And so I'm kind of concerned about that time frame, because I think there are requirements that you should jump on something as soon as possible when that occurs.
Right.
And I don't know if you've had those kinds of issues come up, or
Yeah, I mean, just human nature is sometimes to ignore the problem.
Your head in the sand,
Yeah.
and like, it's not really that bad. But I think that from my perspective, I'm trying to look at it from the standpoint of a patient. That's the question I would ask, and I'd be a little disconcerted if there all this time went by that this hadn't been looked into, or dealt with.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the time to address the issue would be immediately, obviously. But I think it's even before an issue ever happens. I mean, if you're conscious about the possibility of a breach or HIPAA violation, every organization is exposed. I mean, there's no organization that isn't. And so now getting into a room and talking about the issues and where the exposures are and asking some of these questions and putting together a policy that's specific to your organization and say, when this occurs, this is how we react every single time. I think that is most important. And obviously, as the length of time goes by, the claim dollar amount increases. I mean, that's insurance 101. Is the longer it takes for something to be reported, the higher that claim is actually going to be paying out. So people want to be notified.
Yeah. Could you say something about what exactly we hear the PHI, protected health information? Is that the proper
Right.
phrase? What exactly is that?
Well, the information includes their health information, their health insurance information.
Yeah, and I'm asking it
patient data.
rhetorically,
Yeah.
just because it's not everything that you might think it is.
Right.
Yeah, it's they've got to have. It's got to be identifiable. It's got to be. I mean, there's some parts to that. I mean.
Well, no problem. I'd love you to speak to some of your thoughts on putting images out there and just how you guys have thought through that as a risk. And you mentioned some of the things like not putting identifiers on
Sure.
on the photos.
Yeah, and I'll take it just a little bit farther. For example, that system I was talking about last night, where we take photos and download them. That computer that we download those photos to, I was watching a sci-fi movie thing the other day. They talked about an air gap computer. An air gap computer. What is an air gap computer? Well, in essence, what this is, ours is sort of that way. The photos that we download go into a computer that's not hooked into our server, and so that we have to physically move those photos so that there's not a direct link to where they are, if that makes sense. So if somebody were to breach that. And you have to be so careful. Something to the question over here, how many of you, this just kind of drop back to basics, how many of you using electronic health records? How many aren't? Still paper? I'm sort of half and half.
Interesting.
Some still written. How many of you use a fax? Isn't that interesting? In healthcare, we're still using faxes, but I think it's going to be there for a long time. And we do get all kinds of faxes with health information from other patients that get inadvertently sent to us, or even from the Epic system. Somehow I'll get information, somebody will copy me on a health record, and it'll show up in our office, and it's nobody that I've taken care of. They just happen to get the wrong guy on the list. You know, CO, and the next CO is Colburn instead of Cotter, and so it's, you know, the patient's record shows up in my office. Most of the time, those kind of breaches aren't serious, but they could be. They
Right.
could be. Have you had any claims that have to deal with electronic health records per se? Do you know?
I actually have not, of the products that we've sold, we've not gone through a claim, and so it is an unlikely event. And we were actually talking to the Medicus about their overall portfolio of you know, they include $100,000 at no cost into their malpractice policy. How's that claim data shaken out? And I think there's been some claims. I think a lot of it is proactive risk management. I mean, they get, you know, you have the coverage, you have their resources, and you have a question. You know, I got this information. What do I do with it? This happened. What do I do? And you have access to these people that can sort of parachute in and say, "Yeah, here's what you do," and can shut it down quickly.
Okay. Any other questions that we have for Teddy? One in the back here. Go ahead.
I'd just like you to talk a little bit about other devices besides your laptop, like your smartphone. I live and work in a very small community. Lots of my patients know me personally and my family. So there's a lot of the communication that happens via the cell phone. Like
Right.
people text me, "Did you get my lab results?" Because they know me, not just professionally, but personally.
So the question is about cell phones and texting, and I imagine for me, I get people text me with images. You know, I'll have a colleague that's in an operating room that will text me on my phone with an image, say, you know, here I've got this problem, what do I do with it? I know there are devices and there's software that have protected the secured texting, but a lot of us don't do it. How many of you have sent a text about a patient that, I mean, we won't get you, we won't send the cyber police after you, but use your phone? I have, but I have to be really careful what I say. You know, you have to, you know, the patient we saw yesterday,
Right.
I think you should do X, so that if that text itself got out, nobody would know, there'd be no PHI in there.
Right.
And I think that's what I understand is the key, is that you can't tie the information to the patient even a little bit remotely, like the plastic surgeon up there. Yes?
But the same thing happens in my office when I'm at the hospital and I'm talking to my nurse. That kind of transmission is also going. It's right through the normal system.
Sure.
I mean, anybody with access to my phone can pick all of that information up.
I think the most important thing is knowing that you have the exposure, and then sitting down and saying, okay, what are the best in class safety measures to protect this device, and then how do we implement something system-wide, whether it's just one individual physician or a large organization, to say, you know, here's our protocols with our cell phone policy, And this is what we're going to communicate to everyone, and this is how we're going to address, if a cell phone is stolen, we can wipe it remotely and it's locked, and we're using certain software to communicate about patients, and you don't compromise on that. But again, that goes back to, is complete avoidance possible? I don't think it is. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you're not going to stop texting about your patients or receive images or get information sent to you inadvertently. I think therein lies the issue. It's only as our information age grows and technology grows, your exposure is not going to subside. If anything, it's going to grow along with it.
My lifetime experience dealing with plaintiff attorneys is correct. They haven't discovered the immensity of this problem yet because they really haven't started advertising on television about what they can say.
Right.
It's coming, I can guarantee you.
Yeah, I believe it said that. I think just the labor intensiveness of the front end of discovering what exactly has been stolen and how that's damaged people. I think that's been the barrier to keep those plaintiff attorneys from really attacking. But yeah, it's a great point.
Well, I was just going to say, that's a good point, because the whole thing about e-communications, sometimes we're talking about, lost information, like when we lose a tablet or a laptop or a cell phone or something like that. And, it's really important, I think, for folks to have, levels of security so that somebody can't pick that up. You have to have codes to get in. Some people don't. And there was this really interesting study that I forget the name of the organization that did it, but they took like 100 smartphones or cell phones, and they went to different cities and they purposely lost them. And then they could track what people would do when they actually found these devices. And in most cases, a certain percentage actually looked at the devices to try and find out who owned it. But a lot of people were looking at other things to try to get information, and they were concerned about, and obviously some of these things, when they're trying to get information, they're not interested in my health status and that kind of thing. They want my social security number, my driver's license number. They want all those kinds of things. Part of that, I think there's like 18 elements of protected health information under HIPAA that they're trying to use to get information to do or commit fraud, those kinds of things. So it was really interesting from that standpoint, and they could track in that study, what people were actually doing and when. And so some folks did, like I said, made a good faith effort to try to find the owner, but a lot of people, kept them and tried to find information that they thought would be beneficial. So there is that element that's out there, from that standpoint. And it's kind of scary. And I think that's, as you say, that's something that's coming. I think there's going to be more of the hacking part of trying to get into systems where you are communicating without encryption on your because a lot of folks do that. And I agree with Teddy. We're not going to tell people that it's a reality of today that coming from a risk management standpoint, we're not going to tell people stop texting, but really think about what you're doing when you are in terms of trying to protect information or patient identity or deleting information. But a lot of times things are you have to realize a lot of things are never really deleted too from that standpoint. So it's a whole world that's evolving out there, and I think we're probably seeing the iceberg in some cases. So.
One of the things with integrated care organizations and your ACOs, and one of the basic tenets of care in the future is going to be that we are able to all talk to each other for the patient's benefit to maximize their care, to minimize cost. The business of us being able to talk to each other, I think, will evolve down to photos, videos, and text. And I think there will eventually be better programs that, and software on phones, for example, that allow us to do that more effectively and securely. How many of you seen DocBooks? DocBook, I think it is DocBook. We adopted it as part of the Baptist Physician Alliance in Birmingham with our physician organization. We officially adopted it as our secure communication tool. It's through the state of Alabama. The Medical Association also adopted it, and I think the FMA in Florida here has adopted it also. The problem we have with that is that everybody has to sign up for it. And only certain people, only a certain percentage of docs will sign up, even when you send them a little note and say, hey, would you sign up? They don't sign up. But there's a number of those tools that are out there that they come to you free with, like everything else, sort of at a basic level, but there's a cost to it if you want all the bells and whistles. And those costs will have to come down as we move forward. Well, Teddy, why don't we wind this up? And this
Yes.
is one of our early bird sessions, meant to be a bit on the informal side. And we'll take a little break, and then we'll meet back again. Our next session's at 8. And I think you all found the breakfast goodies out front there. And we'll look for you to be back in a few minutes. Let's give Teddy a hand.
All right, thank you for your time.